The afternoon sun blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Scottsdale courthouse as I sat across from my husband Ryan, watching his confident smirk slowly dissolve into absolute terror. The family attorney, Margaret Chen, had just finished reading Article 16 of our prenuptial agreement aloud, her voice crisp and professional in the sterile conference room. In the event of proven infidelity by either party, the unfaithful spouse forfeits all claims to marital assets and custody rights. Paternity tests may be requested for all children to establish biological parentage. The color drained from Ryan's face as the implications hit him like a freight train carrying 6 years of lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 47 minutes. That's exactly how long it took for my entire world to transform from naive wife and mother to a woman holding the keys to complete vindication. 47 minutes of watching Ryan's carefully constructed facade crumble as each piece of evidence was laid bare on the mahogany conference table. The hotel receipts, the text messages, the private investigator's photographs, and finally, the DNA test results that would change everything forever. But most devastating of all was watching him realize that the very document he had insisted on 6 years ago, the prenup designed to protect his family's wealth from what he called gold diggers, had become the weapon that would destroy him completely. I should have recognized the warning signs years earlier, when Ryan first presented me with that thick stack of legal documents just 2 weeks before our wedding. "It's just a formality, Jess," he had said with that charming smile that had first attracted me to him at the charity fundraiser where we met. "My family requires it for anyone marrying into the Thompson dynasty. You understand, right? It protects both of us." I had been so blinded by love and intimidated by his family's wealth that I barely skimmed the 23 pages before signing. After all, I was a third-grade teacher from a middle-class family who had never imagined marrying into Phoenix's elite real estate empire. Ryan had made the prenup signing feel like a romantic gesture rather than a legal trap. The messages painted a picture of an affair that had been going on for over 18 months, filled with intimate details about their relationship and cruel mockery of our marriage. In one particularly devastating email, Ryan had written, "Jess is so clueless. She actually believes I'm working late when I'm with you. Sometimes I think she's too simple to ever figure it out." Teaching elementary school doesn't exactly require genius-level intelligence. The personal attacks cut deeper than the infidelity itself, revealing how little respect he had for me and the career I loved. But the most shocking discovery came when I found messages discussing Sophia's pregnancy. She was apparently 3 months along, and Ryan was planning to leave me once the baby was born. "I can't wait to start our real family," he had written. "Emma will be better off with a father who isn't pretending to love her mother. Kids are resilient, and honestly, Jess will probably be relieved to have the financial support without the hassle of a real relationship." The casual way he dismissed both Emma and me as inconveniences to be managed, rather than loved ones to be cherished, shattered the last of my illusions about our marriage. I spent that night sitting in Emma's bedroom, watching my 4-year-old daughter sleep peacefully while my world collapsed around me. She had Ryan's dark hair and his stubborn chin, features that had always made me smile because they connected her so clearly to her father. But now, staring at her innocent face, I found myself wondering about the timeline. Emma had been born exactly 9 months after our wedding, but the affair had been going on for 18 months. The math made my stomach churn as I realized that Article 16's paternity clause might not be the protection Ryan had intended. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and drove to the address mentioned in Ryan's emails. The Phoenician Resort, the same luxury hotel where he had convinced me to sign the prenup, was now serving as his love nest with his pregnant mistress. I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours, watching couples come and go, until I finally saw Ryan's silver Mercedes pull into the valet area. He emerged looking relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen at home in months, practically bouncing as he walked toward the lobby. 20 minutes later, a stunning brunette in her late 20s stepped out of a red BMW, her hand resting protectively on a small but visible baby bump. Sophia Martinez was everything I wasn't. Tall, glamorous, and carrying herself with the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or social status. She wore designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her jewelry caught the Arizona sun like beacons of wealth and sophistication. I watched through tears as Ryan greeted her with the kind of passionate embrace he hadn't given me in years, his hands gentle and protective as they rested on her growing belly. Driving home that afternoon, I felt smaller and more worthless than I had since my teenage years. Ryan's cruel words about my intelligence and profession echoed in my mind, mixing with the image of his tender care for Sophia and their unborn child. I had spent 6 years of my life trying to fit into his world, attending charity galas where I felt out of place, making conversation with wives whose handbags cost more than my car payment, and constantly trying to prove that I was worthy of the Thompson family name. Now I realized that Ryan had never seen me as an equal partner but as a placeholder until someone better came along. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the prenup spread out before me, reading every word with the desperate attention of someone whose life depended on understanding each clause. The document was a masterpiece of legal precision, clearly written by attorneys who understood how to protect wealth across generations. Most of the clauses heavily favored Ryan and his family, granting me only minimal rights to property and assets accumulated during our marriage. But Article 16 stood out like a beacon of hope in an otherwise devastating landscape of legal disadvantages. The paternity clause was oddly specific, requiring DNA testing for all children in the event of proven infidelity, with results determining custody and financial support obligations. At the time of signing, this had seemed like standard legal language protecting both parties from false paternity claims. But now, reading it with fresh eyes and growing suspicion, I realized that Article 16 might be the key to my salvation. If Emma wasn't biologically Ryan's daughter, the entire prenup could be challenged, and his claims to our home, his business interests, and his family inheritance would be thrown into question. I spent the next week in a strange state of suspended animation, continuing my daily routine while secretly gathering evidence of Ryan's affair. I made copies of the hotel receipts I found in his wallet, photographed the credit card statements showing charges to expensive restaurants and jewelry stores, and even managed to take screenshots of his text messages when he carelessly left his phone unattended. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, proof that I wasn't as stupid or naive as he believed. The most crucial discovery came when I found business expense reports in Ryan's home office, showing that he had been charging his affair to Thompson Development Group's corporate account. The hotel rooms, the dinners, the weekend getaways with Sophia had all been billed as client entertainment expenses, meaning that Ryan hadn't just been cheating on me but stealing from his own family's business to fund his infidelity. This revelation gave me the final piece of ammunition I needed to ensure that his destruction would be complete and public. But I knew that I couldn't navigate this complex legal and financial battlefield alone. I was a school teacher with a bachelor's degree in elementary education, not a lawyer or business strategist. I needed help from someone who understood the Thompson family's vulnerabilities and had the expertise to use Article 16 as the weapon it was designed to be. That's when I remembered Margaret Chen, the attorney who had handled my neighbor's contentious divorce 2 years earlier. Margaret had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely committed to protecting her clients' interests, especially women who had been financially or emotionally abused by wealthy spouses. Our first meeting took place at a small coffee shop in Central Phoenix, far from the Scottsdale social scene where Ryan and I were known as a couple. Margaret arrived precisely on time, a petite woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of intense focus that made you understand why she had never lost a high-profile case. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad and occasionally asking pointed questions about dates, amounts, and specific details of Ryan's behavior. When I finished explaining the situation, Margaret sat back in her chair with a satisfied expression that sent chills down my spine. "Jessica," she said, using my full name with the formality that would characterize our entire relationship, "I want you to understand something very important. Your husband made a critical error when he insisted on Article 16. He was so focused on protecting his family's wealth from potential gold diggers that he created a legal mechanism that will destroy him completely. If the evidence you've described is accurate, and if Emma's paternity is questionable, we're not just talking about a divorce settlement. We're talking about the complete dissolution of his financial and social standing. Margaret explained that Article 16 contained language that would automatically trigger a forensic audit of all marital assets, a process that would expose Ryan's misuse of business funds and potentially lead to criminal charges for embezzlement. More importantly, if Emma proved not to be his biological daughter, the prenup's assumption of paternity would be invalidated, calling into question his inheritance rights and his position in the family business. The Thompson family had a long history of disowning members who brought shame to their name, and Ryan's public humiliation would likely result in his complete ostracization from both his family and their business empire. But I need you to be absolutely certain about this path, Margaret continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the devastating consequences of high-stakes legal battles. Once we file the motion to invoke Article 16, there's no going back. Ryan will fight with everything he has, and his family will use their considerable resources to protect their reputation. You need to be prepared for a war that will be fought in courtrooms, in the media, and in the social circles where you've built your life. Are you ready for that level of scrutiny and conflict? I thought about Emma sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, about the years I had spent trying to be worthy of a man who saw me as disposable, about the future I had imagined that was built on lies and manipulation. I'm ready, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I want him to face the consequences of his choices, and I want my daughter to grow up knowing that her mother fought for what was right. Margaret smiled for the first time since we had met, an expression that was both warm and predatory. Then let's give Ryan Thompson exactly what he deserves. But first, we need to establish the paternity question definitively. I'm going to arrange for DNA testing that will either confirm or destroy his entire world. And Jessica, I want you to know that whatever the results show, you and Emma will be protected. This isn't just about revenge, it's about justice. The following morning brought a clarity I hadn't experienced in months, as if the desert sunrise had burned away the fog of denial that had clouded my judgment for so long. I woke at 5:30, an hour before my usual alarm, with a sense of purpose that felt both foreign and empowering. Emma was still asleep in her princess-themed bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and the security of a world where Daddy was still a hero who brought her ice cream and read bedtime stories. I stood in her doorway, watching her peaceful face, knowing that today would begin the process of either confirming or destroying the foundation of her identity. Ryan was already gone when I made my way to the kitchen, having left early for what his hastily scribbled note claimed was a client breakfast meeting in Tempe. The note was signed with his usual casual R instead of any term of endearment, a small detail that now seemed loaded with Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Significance. I had grown so accustomed to his emotional distance that I had stopped noticing when he stopped saying he loved me, when he stopped kissing me goodbye, when he stopped pretending that our marriage was anything more than a convenient arrangement that allowed him to maintain his image as a stable family man. Margaret had instructed me to document everything over the next few days before we made our first official move. Evidence gathering is an art form, she had explained during our coffee shop meeting. We need to build an unassailable case that demonstrates not just infidelity, but a pattern of deception and financial misconduct that spans the entire duration of your marriage. Ryan has been sloppy because he thinks you're too trusting to investigate, but that arrogance will be his downfall. I began my investigation in Ryan's home office, a space that had always felt off-limits despite being in our shared home. The room was decorated with expensive golf memorabilia and photographs from various Thompson Development Group corporate events, images that showcased Ryan's integration into his family's business empire. His desk was a monument to organized chaos, with stacks of project files, architectural drawings, and client contracts arranged in a system that only he understood. But hidden among the legitimate business documents, I found evidence of a double life that was far more extensive than I had initially realized. The credit card statements I discovered painted a picture of systematic deception that went back almost to the beginning of our marriage. Charges to luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, and exclusive boutiques told the story of a man who was living like a bachelor while married to a woman who was clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores. The amounts were staggering, Tens of thousands of dollars spent on entertainment and gifts that had never benefited our family. Each line item felt like a personal betrayal, evidence that Ryan had been prioritizing his own pleasure while I sacrificed to make our household budget work on my teacher's salary. But the most damaging discovery was a manila folder tucked behind a framed photograph of Emma's first birthday party. Inside were bank statements for an account I had never seen before, a business checking account for something called RT Consulting Services. The account showed regular deposits from Thompson Development Group, followed by immediate withdrawals for cash, hotel payments, and transfers to what appeared to be personal investment accounts. Ryan had been systematically siphoning money from his family's business through a shell company, using corporate funds to finance his affair while hiding the financial trail from both his family and me. The documentation revealed that RT Consulting Services had been operating for nearly 3 years, with total transactions exceeding $200,000. Ryan had been billing his family's company for fake consulting services while using the money to maintain his relationship with Sophia and fund a lifestyle that our legitimate income couldn't support. The sophistication of the scheme suggested that this wasn't impulsive infidelity, but calculated financial fraud that demonstrated a complete disregard for both his marriage vows and his professional obligations. I spent hours photographing every document, creating a digital record of Ryan's crimes that would be impossible for him to deny or destroy. Each click of my phone's camera felt like a small act of rebellion against the naive woman I had been, the trusting wife who had believed that love was enough to sustain a marriage built on lies. Margaret had been right about the importance of thorough documentation, because the evidence I was uncovering painted a picture of betrayal that went far beyond simple adultery. The most personally devastating discovery came when I found a jewelry receipt dated just 2 weeks before Emma's 4th birthday. Ryan had purchased a diamond necklace worth $12,000 from one of Scottsdale's most exclusive boutiques, a piece of jewelry I had never seen, and certainly never received. The receipt was accompanied by a handwritten note in Ryan's distinctive scrawl. "For my beautiful Sophia, who makes every day worth living. Thank you for being patient while I figure out how to leave my mistake of a marriage. Soon we'll be together officially, and our child will grow up with parents who actually love each other." Reading those words in my husband's handwriting felt like being struck by lightning. The casual cruelty of referring to our marriage as a mistake, the dismissive way he discussed our daughter's future, and the obvious depth of his emotional investment in Sophia created a pain that was almost physical in its intensity. But underneath the hurt, I felt something harder and more dangerous growing, a cold anger that would fuel my determination to see justice served in the most public and devastating way possible. The note also contained details about Ryan's long-term plans that revealed the true scope of his deception. He had apparently been consulting with a different attorney about divorce strategy, someone who had advised him to wait until after Thompson Development Group's next major project was completed before filing papers. The timing would maximize his business income while minimizing my claims to marital assets, a strategy that demonstrated months of calculating planning rather than impulsive decision-making. Emma's innocent questions over breakfast became unbearable as I processed the magnitude of Ryan's betrayal. "When is Daddy coming home?" she asked, looking up from her cereal with the kind of pure trust that only children possess. "He promised to help me with my school project about families." I managed to smile and deflect her questions, but internally, I was grappling with the possibility that the man she adored might not even be her biological father, and that our entire family structure was built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. The school day provided a welcome distraction from the emotional chaos at home. My third-grade students demanded the kind of focused attention that left no room for personal drama, and I found comfort in the familiar routines of lesson plans, playground supervision, and parent communications. Teaching had always been my sanctuary, a professional identity that existed independently of my role as Ryan's wife or Emma's mother. But even in the classroom, I found myself studying the children's faces, noting which ones resembled their fathers and which ones carried their mother's features, unable to stop thinking about the paternity questions that hung over my own daughter's future. During my lunch break, I called Margaret from my empty classroom to update her on my evidence-gathering efforts. Her reaction to my discoveries was immediate and intense, with a satisfaction in her voice that suggested she had encountered similar cases before. "Jessica, what you've found is extraordinary," she said, her words carrying the weight of someone who understood the legal implications of financial fraud. Ryan hasn't just committed adultery, he's engaged in embezzlement, tax evasion, and corporate fraud. When we present this evidence to the court, we won't just be seeking a divorce settlement, we'll be asking for complete financial restitution and potentially criminal prosecution. Margaret explained that the shell company discovery was particularly damaging because it demonstrated premeditation and sophistication that would be impossible for Ryan to dismiss as a momentary lapse in judgment. The Thompson family has built their reputation on integrity and community involvement, she continued. When they discover that Ryan has been stealing from their business to fund an affair, they'll distance themselves from him so quickly it will make your head spin. Family businesses like theirs can't afford to be associated with financial scandal, especially in a tight-knit community like Scottsdale, where reputation is everything. The conversation with Margaret shifted my perspective from personal betrayal to strategic warfare. This wasn't just about my broken marriage anymore, it was about justice, accountability, and ensuring that Ryan faced real consequences for years of calculated deception. I want you to arrange for the DNA testing as soon as possible, I told her, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I need to know the truth about Emma's parentage, and I want Ryan to understand that his carefully planned future is about to become his worst nightmare. That afternoon, Margaret connected me with Dr. Patricia Williams, a family physician who specialized in confidential paternity testing for legal proceedings. Dr. Williams explained that she could arrange for Emma's DNA sample to be collected during a routine pediatric checkup, a process that would be completely painless and invisible to both Emma and Ryan. We'll compare your daughter's genetic markers to samples from both potential fathers, she explained with professional discretion. The results will be legally admissible and definitive, providing the foundation for any custody or financial decisions that need to be made. The appointment was scheduled for the following week, giving me time to prepare Emma for what she would think was a standard medical visit. But the waiting period also allowed me to continue my investigation into Ryan's financial activities. And what I discovered during those additional days of searching exceeded even my worst expectations. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet in our garage, I found contracts and correspondence related to Ryan's plans to purchase a house for Sophia, a luxury property in Paradise Valley that would cost nearly $2 million and be financed through a complex arrangement involving Thompson Development Group funds. The house purchase was apparently timed to coincide with the birth of Sophia's baby, creating a timeline that would allow Ryan to establish his new family and style while abandoning Emma and me with minimal financial support. The correspondence revealed that Ryan had been working with a real estate agent for months, viewing properties and negotiating terms for a transaction that would essentially transfer corporate assets to his personal use. The sophistication of the money laundering scheme suggested that Ryan had been planning his exit strategy far longer than I had imagined, treating our marriage as a temporary inconvenience rather than a serious commitment. But the most shocking discovery was a letter from Sophia that had been hidden in the same filing cabinet. A handwritten note that revealed details about their relationship that changed everything I thought I knew about the timeline of Ryan's betrayal. My darling Ryan, the letter began, I can't believe it's been almost 5 years since we first met at that construction site opening. I know it's been hard keeping our relationship secret while you've been stuck in that marriage, but I'm so grateful for your patience and your commitment to our future together. 5 years. Ryan had been cheating on me for almost our entire marriage, beginning his affair with Sophia just months after Emma was born. The timeline made me physically ill, as I realized that Ryan had been living a double life almost from the moment we became a family, viewing his marriage to me as nothing more than a public relations exercise, while conducting his real relationship in secret. Every anniversary dinner, every family vacation, every moment of intimacy we had shared had been contaminated by his ongoing betrayal and deception. The letter also contained references to previous pregnancies that had ended in miscarriage, suggesting that Sophia's current pregnancy was not their first attempt to start a family together. I know how disappointed you were when we lost the baby 2 years ago, she wrote, but the doctor says this pregnancy is progressing perfectly, and soon we'll have the family we've always dreamed of. The casual mention of previous pregnancies revealed a level of emotional investment between Ryan and Sophia that went far beyond a simple affair, representing a parallel relationship that had been developing its own milestones and memories while I remained completely oblivious. Reading Sophia's letter in our garage, surrounded by the accumulated possessions of what I had thought was a happy marriage, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but they were joined by something harder and more dangerous. A cold determination to ensure that Ryan's carefully constructed web of lies would collapse in the most public and devastating way possible. He had spent years treating me like a fool, confident that his superior intelligence and social connections would protect him from consequences. But he had made one critical error in his calculations, underestimating the woman he had married and the power of the legal document he had insisted on signing. That evening, as I prepared dinner for Emma and waited for Ryan to return from another business meeting, I felt like I was playing a role in a theatrical production where only I knew the true script. Ryan arrived home at nearly 9 o'clock, claiming that his client dinner had run late, but I could smell perfume on his clothes and see the satisfied expression of a man who had spent the evening with someone who appreciated him. He kissed Emma goodnight with genuine affection, reading her a story and tucking her into bed with the tenderness that had once convinced me he would be a wonderful father. But watching him perform these domestic rituals while knowing about his secret life felt like observing a master manipulator practicing his craft. After Emma was asleep, Ryan retreated to his home office to, quote, catch up on paperwork, a routine that I now understood meant communicating with Sophia and managing his fraudulent financial schemes. I sat in our living room, surrounded by photographs and mementos from 6 years of what I had thought was marriage, processing the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. But instead of despair, I felt a growing sense of anticipation for the moment when Ryan would discover that his victim had become his opponent, and that the prenuptial agreement he had used to trap me would become the instrument of his complete downfall. The next morning brought a phone call from Margaret that would accelerate our timeline and add another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. "Jessica, I need you to sit down," she said, her voice carrying an urgency that immediately put me on high alert. "I've been conducting some additional research into Ryan's background, and I've discovered something that changes everything about our strategy. Ryan's relationship with the Thompson family is not what it appears to be, and the implications for Article 16 are far more significant than we initially realized." Margaret explained that her investigation into Thompson Development Group's corporate structure had revealed discrepancies in Ryan's legal status within the family business. "Ryan is not actually a blood relative of Robert and Linda Thompson," she continued, her words hitting me like a physical blow. "He was adopted into the family when he was 17 years old, after his biological parents died in a car accident. The Thompsons took him in as an act of charity, but they never legally formalized the adoption. Ryan has been presenting himself as a biological heir to the Thompson fortune, but he has no legal claim to the family inheritance." The revelation recontextualized everything I knew about Ryan's relationship with his family and his desperate need to maintain their approval. His obsession with status and wealth wasn't just personality trait, it was the behavior of someone who knew his position was precarious and could be revoked at any time. The prenuptial agreement wasn't just about protecting inherited wealth. It was about maintaining the fiction that Ryan was a legitimate member of the Thompson dynasty, rather than an outsider who had been granted temporary access to their social and financial resources. "But there's more," Margaret continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had uncovered a particularly devastating piece of information. "I've learned that Robert Thompson has been growing suspicious of Ryan's business expenses and has hired a forensic accountant to audit the company's books. If our timeline is correct, that audit will uncover Ryan's fraudulent consulting company within the next few weeks. When the Thompson family discovers that Ryan has been stealing from them to fund an affair, they'll not only disown him, they'll likely pursue criminal charges to protect their own reputation." The convergence of multiple investigations created a perfect storm that would destroy Ryan's life from every possible angle. The DNA test results would either confirm his paternity of Emma or reveal another devastating lie. The forensic audit would expose his financial crimes, and the invocation of Article 16 would strip him of any legal protection the prenuptial agreement might have provided. Ryan's world was about to collapse not from a single devastating blow, but from a coordinated assault that would eliminate every escape route he might have planned. "I want to accelerate our timeline," I told Margaret, feeling a surge of confidence that surprised me with its intensity. I want Ryan to face all of these consequences simultaneously, so he understands that his careful planning and superior intelligence weren't enough to protect him from the truth. I want him to experience the same feeling of helplessness and betrayal that he put me through. But I want him to face it publicly, with his entire social network watching his humiliation. Margaret's laugh was cold and satisfied. Jessica, I think you're going to be surprised by how much you enjoy watching justice unfold. But I want to make sure you're prepared for the aftermath. Once we trigger Article 16 and expose Ryan's crimes, there will be no going back to the life you've known. Your marriage will be over, your social circle will choose sides, and you'll be starting completely fresh. Are you ready for that level of change? I thought about Emma sleeping peacefully upstairs, about the years I had spent trying to be worthy of a man who saw me as disposable, about the teacher's salary I had stretched to support a lifestyle that was built on stolen money. I've been living a lie for 6 years, I replied. I'm ready to start living the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. And I want my daughter to grow up knowing that her mother had the courage to fight for what was right, even when it meant losing everything she thought she wanted. The forensic accountant that Robert Thompson had hired turned out to be someone Margaret knew well, a detail that would prove crucial to our strategy in ways I couldn't have anticipated. David Chen, Margaret's younger brother, had built his reputation by unraveling complex financial fraud schemes for some of Arizona's most prominent families and businesses. When Margaret called him to discuss the Thompson Development Group audit, she discovered that David had already uncovered significant irregularities in Ryan's expense reports and was preparing to present his findings to Robert Thompson within the week. This is better than I could have hoped, Margaret explained during our emergency meeting at her downtown office the next day. David has been investigating Ryan's financial activities completely independently of our divorce case, which means his findings will carry additional weight because they're not motivated by marital disputes. When we combine David's forensic evidence with the DNA test results and the documentation you've gathered, we'll have an unbreakable case that demonstrates Ryan's pattern of deception across every aspect of his life. Margaret's office occupied the entire 40th floor of a glass tower in central Phoenix, with panoramic views of the desert landscape that stretched toward the distant mountains. The space was decorated with understated elegance, featuring contemporary art and furnishings that spoke to both success and sophisticated taste. But what impressed me most was the wall of framed photographs showing Margaret with various clients, judges, and political figures, evidence of the connections and influence that would be crucial to ensuring Ryan faced real consequences for his actions. I want you to understand something important about the Thompson family dynamics, Margaret continued as we settled into her conference room with its sweeping city views. Robert and Linda Thompson are not just wealthy real estate developers. They're pillars of the Scottsdale community with reputations that have been carefully cultivated over decades. They serve on charity boards, fund scholarship programs, and have their name on buildings throughout the Phoenix area. When they discover that Ryan has been using their business to fund an affair, they won't just be angry about the money, they'll be furious about the potential damage to their public image. Margaret pulled out a thick file that contained what she described as background research on the Thompson family's business practices and social connections. The family had built their empire through a combination of shrewd investments, community involvement, and absolutely pristine reputations that allowed them to attract high-profile clients and political support. Ryan's fraud represented exactly the kind of scandal that could damage relationships they had spent 30 years building, making it inevitable that they would distance themselves from him as quickly and publicly as possible. The Thompsons have already been questioning Ryan's lifestyle and spending habits, Margaret revealed, consulting her notes from a conversation with David. Linda Thompson mentioned to the country club's board of directors that she was concerned about Ryan's expensive tastes, and wondered where he was getting the money to support such an extravagant lifestyle on his supposed salary. When David's audit reveals that Ryan has been stealing from their company, they'll realize that their instincts were correct and that they've been harboring a criminal in their family business. But Margaret's most valuable insight came from her understanding of how the Thompson family would react to the revelation that Ryan wasn't actually their biological relative. Robert Thompson is obsessed with legacy and bloodline, she explained. He spent years grooming Ryan to eventually take over the family business. believing that he was investing in a true heir who would carry on the Thompson name and values. When he discovers that Ryan is not only unrelated to them, but has been stealing from them, the sense of betrayal will be absolutely devastating. The meeting with Margaret confirmed that our strategy needed to be coordinated and comprehensive, targeting Ryan's vulnerabilities across multiple fronts simultaneously. We're going to invoke Article 16 immediately after the DNA test results are available, she explained, outlining a timeline that would maximize the psychological impact of our assault. The paternity results will either confirm that Emma is Ryan's daughter, giving us custody leverage, or reveal that she isn't, which would invalidate his entire relationship with your family and call into question every assumption he's made about his future. Margaret's plan was diabolical in its elegance, designed to strip away every source of security and identity that Ryan had built his life around. He's constructed his entire persona around being a successful Thompson family member with a stable marriage and a beautiful daughter, she continued. When we destroy each of those pillars simultaneously, he'll have nothing left to fall back on except the criminal charges and social ostracism that will follow. The following week brought the DNA testing appointment that would either confirm or shatter everything Ryan believed about his relationship with Emma. Dr. Patricia Williams conducted the sample collection with the kind of professional discretion that made the process feel routine rather than life-altering, explaining to Emma that the mouth swab was part of a standard health screening that all children her age needed to have. Emma was cooperative and cheerful throughout the appointment, chatting about her upcoming school art show and asking if she could have ice cream afterward, completely unaware that the simple test might fundamentally change her understanding of her own identity. But the most challenging aspect of the appointment wasn't the technical procedure, it was maintaining my composure, while watching Emma trust me completely despite knowing that I was potentially about to reveal information that would devastate her world. She held my hand during the brief sample collection, looking up at me with the kind of absolute faith that only children possess, and I felt the weight of responsibility for protecting her from the adult chaos that was about to explode around our family. Dr. Williams explained that the results would be available within 72 hours, but that she would call me immediately with the findings rather than waiting for the standard written report. I understand the sensitive nature of this situation, she said with professional sympathy. Whatever the results show, I want you to know that Emma will be supported through any transitions or changes that need to happen. Children are remarkably resilient, but they need honest, age-appropriate communication and consistent emotional support. The waiting period between the DNA test and the results felt like living in suspended animation, knowing that everything about my future depended on genetic information that was completely beyond my control. I continued my normal routines with Emma, taking her to school, helping with homework, and maintaining the facade of stability while internally preparing for either outcome. If Emma was Ryan's biological daughter, I would use that information to secure custody and financial support while exposing his affair. If she wasn't his daughter, the revelation would destroy not just our marriage, but potentially Emma's relationship with the only father she had ever known. During those 3 days of waiting, I also continued gathering evidence of Ryan's financial crimes with a thoroughness that surprised me. Margaret had provided me with a detailed checklist of documentation that would be useful for both the divorce proceedings and any potential criminal charges, and I approached the task with the methodical attention to detail that had made me an effective teacher. I photographed bank statements, copied email correspondences, and documented every instance of suspicious spending or unexplained income that I could find in Ryan's personal and business records. The most damaging discovery during this period was a series of text messages between Ryan and Sophia that revealed their specific plans for dealing with me and Emma once their relationship became public. "Don't worry about Jessica," Ryan had written. "She's too dependent and insecure to cause real problems. I'll offer her enough money to keep quiet, and she'll probably be grateful to avoid the embarrassment of a public divorce. Emma will adjust to having 2 homes. And honestly, she'll be better off with a father who isn't pretending to love her mother." The casual cruelty of these messages was breathtaking, revealing that Ryan had not only been planning our family's destruction, but discussing it with his mistress as if we were obstacles to be managed rather than human beings with feelings and rights. Sophia's responses were equally callous, referring to me as, quote, the wife problem, and suggesting that Ryan should move quickly to establish custody arrangements before I had time to get vindictive and make things difficult. But the most personally devastating text message was one in which Ryan discussed his doubts about Emma's paternity with Sophia. "I've always wondered if Emma is actually mine," he had written. The timing was tight, and Jessica was working with that male teacher at her school around the time Emma was conceived. If it turns out she's not my kid, this whole situation becomes much simpler. I can walk away clean, without any ongoing obligations. Reading those words felt like being punched in the stomach, not just because of their cruelty, but because of what they revealed about Ryan's true feelings toward the daughter who adored him. Emma had spent 4 years believing that Ryan was her devoted father, calling him daddy and trusting him completely, while he had been secretly hoping that she wasn't his biological child so he could abandon her without guilt or financial responsibility. The text messages also revealed that Ryan had been consulting with a different attorney about divorce strategy, someone who had advised him to challenge Emma's paternity if the marriage ended badly. "Smith says that if we can prove the kid isn't mine, Jessica loses most of her leverage," Ryan had written to Sophia. "No child support, no custody complications, and I can argue that the whole marriage was based on fraud. Jessica trapped me with a pregnancy that wasn't even mine, so I shouldn't have to pay for her deception." This discovery fundamentally changed my understanding of Ryan's motivations and the depth of his planning. He hadn't just been having an affair, he had been preparing for years to destroy our family in the most brutal way possible, using Emma's paternity as a weapon against both of us. The prenuptial agreement with its Article 16 paternity clause wasn't just about protecting his family's wealth. It was part of a long-term strategy to ensure that he could escape our marriage without any financial or emotional obligations. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 72 hours after Emma's DNA test, Dr. Williams called with results that would change everything about our family's future. Her voice was carefully neutral as she delivered information that would either validate or shatter Ryan's assumptions about his relationship with Emma. "Jessica, I have the paternity test results," she said, her words carrying the weight of life-altering news. "I think it would be best if we discuss them in person rather than over the phone. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" The drive to Dr. Williams' office felt like traveling toward either vindication or catastrophe, with no middle ground between the two possibilities. I had spent the past week mentally preparing for both outcomes, but now that the moment of truth had arrived, I realized that no amount of preparation could adequately equip me for information that would fundamentally reshape Emma's identity and future. The only certainty was that Ryan's carefully constructed plans were about to collide with reality in ways he couldn't control or manipulate. Dr. Williams received me in her private office rather than an examination room, a setting that suggested the gravity of what she was about to reveal. The results folder sat on her desk like a time bomb, containing genetic information that would either confirm Ryan's paternity or expose another layer of deception in our already complicated situation. "Jessica, I want you to know that whatever these results show, Emma is a healthy, well-adjusted child who will continue to thrive with proper support and honest communication," she began, her words providing comfort while preparing me for potentially devastating news. "The DNA test results are conclusive," Dr. Williams continued, opening the folder to reveal laboratory reports filled with genetic markers and statistical analyses. "Ryan Thompson is not Emma's biological father. The genetic comparison shows 0 probability of paternity, which means that Emma was conceived with someone else during the time period when you believed your marriage was monogamous." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, not because I hadn't considered the possibility, but because of what it meant for Emma's relationship with the only father she had ever known. Ryan had been present for her birth, had held her as a newborn, had taught her to ride a bicycle and read bedtime stories, building 4 years of memories and emotional bonds that would now be called into question by scientific evidence. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming, because while the DNA results vindicated my suspicions about Ryan's character, they also created new challenges for Emma's emotional well-being. But Dr. Williams wasn't finished with her revelations. "Jessica, there's something else you need to know about these results," she continued, her voice carrying an additional weight that suggested more complications ahead. The genetic analysis revealed some unexpected information about Emma's biological father. Based on the markers we found, Emma's father is someone you know, someone who has been part of your life for several years. The room seemed to spin as I processed this additional layer of complexity. The DNA test hadn't just revealed that Ryan wasn't Emma's father. It had apparently identified who the biological father actually was, someone from within our social or professional circle who had been present throughout Emma's childhood. The implications were staggering, suggesting that Emma's true parentage involved someone who had been keeping this secret for 4 years while watching Ryan raise a child he believed to be his own. The genetic markers indicate that Emma's biological father is Michael Stevens, Dr. Williams said, referring to my former teaching colleague who had worked at Sunny Days Elementary during the year before Emma was conceived. The probability of paternity is 97%, which is as close to certainty as genetic testing can provide. Michael Stevens. The name brought back memories of a brief period of closeness during a particularly difficult time in my marriage, when Ryan had been traveling extensively for business, and I had been feeling isolated and neglected. Michael had been kind and supportive, offering friendship and understanding when I needed it most, but our relationship had never progressed beyond a few conversations and a single evening of comfort that had apparently resulted in Emma's conception. He had transferred to a different school district before Emma was born, and I had convinced myself that my marriage to Ryan was worth fighting for, never imagining that the brief connection with Michael had created the daughter who became the center of my world. Michael Stevens has been notified of these results as part of the standard protocol for paternity identification, Dr. Williams explained. He's requested a meeting to discuss the situation and his potential role in Emma's life. I want you to know that you have complete control over how and when any contact occurs, and that Emma's best interests will be the primary consideration in any decisions that need to be made. The revelation about Michael's paternity created a completely new dimension to an already complex situation. Emma had a biological father who was a decent, caring man with genuine interest in her well-being. But she also had an emotional connection to Ryan that had been built over 4 years of daily interaction and love. The DNA results meant that Ryan would lose any legal claim to custody or visitation, but they also meant that Emma would potentially gain a relationship with her biological father while losing the only father she had ever known. I need time to process this information before I make any decisions about contact or custody arrangements, I told Dr. Williams, feeling overwhelmed by the cascading implications of the paternity results. Emma's emotional well-being has to be the priority, and I need to figure out how to explain this situation in a way that protects her from feeling abandoned or confused. But even as I struggled with the personal implications of the DNA results, I could already see how this information would completely destroy Ryan's legal and social position. Article 16 of our prenuptial agreement would strip him of all claims to marital assets and custody rights. The Thompson family would disown him for his financial crimes, and his affair with Sophia would become public knowledge in a community where reputation meant everything. The paternity results were the final piece of evidence needed to ensure that Ryan's carefully constructed life would collapse completely and permanently. Margaret's reaction to the DNA results was immediate and strategic, focusing on how this information would accelerate our timeline and maximize the damage to Ryan's position. "This is perfect," she said when I called her from the parking lot of Dr. Williams' office. "Ryan has been living a lie for 4 years, raising a child who isn't his while stealing money to fund an affair. When we present this information to the court along with the financial fraud evidence, he'll lose everything simultaneously. His wife, his daughter, his family business, his inheritance, and his freedom." The plan that Margaret outlined was comprehensive and devastating, designed to ensure that Ryan faced consequences that matched the scope of his deception. We'll file the Article 16 motion tomorrow morning, immediately after David presents his forensic audit findings to Robert Thompson. Ryan will discover that his business crimes have been exposed, his affair is public knowledge, and his daughter isn't his biological child, all within the span of a few hours. The psychological impact will be so severe that he won't be able to mount an effective defense. That evening, as I sat in Emma's bedroom watching her sleep peacefully while surrounded by photographs of the man she believed was her father, I felt the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. Tomorrow would begin the process of dismantling the only life Emma had ever known, replacing it with truth that was more complex and potentially more painful than the lies we had been living. But I also knew that continuing to live those lies would be worse for both of us, trapping us in a relationship built on deception and preventing Emma from knowing her real biological father. Ryan returned home late that night from another business meeting, unaware that his entire world was about to collapse around him. He checked on Emma with the same tenderness he had always shown, kissing her forehead and adjusting her blankets with the care of a devoted father. But watching him perform these paternal rituals, while knowing that he had no biological connection to the child he was tucking in, felt like observing a performance rather than genuine affection. Tomorrow, Ryan would discover that the daughter he had been secretly hoping wasn't his, actually wasn't. But instead of providing him with the freedom he thought he wanted, the revelation would destroy every aspect of the life he had built on lies and manipulation. The coordinated assault on Ryan's world began at precisely 8 o'clock on a cloudless Thursday morning when David Chen walked into Robert Thompson's executive office, carrying a manila folder that contained evidence of systematic embezzlement spanning 3 years. Margaret had positioned herself strategically by scheduling our Article 16 filing for 9:30, giving the Thompson family exactly 90 minutes to process the devastating news about Ryan's financial crimes, before learning that their adopted son had also been living a complete lie about his marriage and daughter. Robert Thompson's reaction to David's forensic audit was swift and decisive, according to Margaret's sources within the Thompson Development Group offices. The discovery that Ryan had been stealing corporate funds to finance an affair triggered an immediate investigation that revealed the full scope of his deception, including forged documents, falsified expense reports, and unauthorized transfers that totaled nearly $300,000. Within an hour of David's presentation, Ryan's corporate credit cards had been canceled, his office access revoked, and his employment terminated with cause. But the Thompson family's response went far beyond simple termination. Linda Thompson, who had treated Ryan like a beloved son for nearly 20 years, was reportedly so devastated by the betrayal that she required medical attention after learning the details of his crimes. Robert Thompson's reaction was colder, but more dangerous, immediately contacting both criminal prosecutors and civil attorneys to ensure that Ryan faced maximum consequences for his theft and fraud. The family that had given Ryan everything was now committed to ensuring that he lost everything, including his freedom. Margaret received the call confirming Ryan's termination at 9:15, just as we were walking into the Maricopa County Family Court building to file our motion invoking Article 16. Phase 1 complete, she said with grim satisfaction, as we rode the elevator to the 4th floor where our case would be heard. Ryan has just discovered that his business career is over and that criminal charges are imminent. Now we're going to show him that his personal life is equally destroyed. The courthouse that morning was bustling with the usual mix of attorneys, families, and court personnel managing the complex machinery of legal proceedings that reshape lives on a daily basis. But walking through those corridors with Margaret, carrying evidence that would fundamentally alter my family's future, felt like participating in something more significant than routine legal business. We were about to trigger a chain of events that would expose years of deception and ensure that justice was served in the most public and devastating way possible. Judge Harold Barnes presided over the emergency hearing that would determine whether Article 16 could be invoked based on the evidence we had gathered. Judge Barnes had a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings and little patience for complicated marital disputes, but Margaret had assured me that the scope of Ryan's deception would capture his attention and ensure serious consideration of our claims. The courtroom itself was smaller than I had expected, with wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, and an atmosphere of institutional authority that made everything feel both formal and final. Ryan arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes after our hearing began, having been notified of the proceedings by an emergency summons delivered to his parents' house, where he had retreated after being fired from Thompson Development Group. His appearance shocked me with its dishevelment and desperation, revealing a man who had already begun to understand that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. The confident, well-dressed businessman I had married was replaced by someone who looked defeated and frightened, wearing wrinkled clothes and displaying the hollow expression of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. "Your Honor," Margaret began, addressing Judge Barnes with the authoritative presence that had made her one of Arizona's most respected family attorneys. "We are here today to invoke Article 16 of the prenuptial agreement between Jessica and Ryan Miller, a clause that strips an unfaithful spouse of all marital assets and custody rights upon proof of adultery. The evidence we will present demonstrates not only systematic infidelity spanning 5 years, but financial fraud, identity deception, and paternity misrepresentation that invalidates every assumption upon which this marriage was built." The presentation of evidence unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction, with each revelation building upon the previous one to create an overwhelming case against Ryan's character and credibility. Margaret began with the financial documentation showing Ryan's shell company and the embezzlement of corporate funds, establishing a pattern of deception that demonstrated his willingness to steal from his own family to finance his affair. The bank statements, forged invoices, and expense reports painted a picture of systematic fraud that had been ongoing for years, while I struggled to make our household budget work on my teacher's salary. The romantic evidence came next, including the hotel receipts, text messages, and photographs that documented Ryan's relationship with Sophia Martinez. Margaret presented each piece of evidence methodically, allowing the judge to see the scope and duration of the affair, while emphasizing the cruel language Ryan had used to describe me and Emma in his communications with his mistress. The text messages referring to me as too simple, and Emma as a, quote, a complication, were read aloud in the courtroom, creating a public record of Ryan's callous disregard for his family's well-being. But the most devastating evidence was the DNA test results that proved Ryan was not Emma's biological father, information that struck him like a physical blow when Margaret revealed it to the court. I watched Ryan's face as he processed this information, seeing confusion, relief, and horror cycle through his expressions as he realized that the daughter he had been secretly hoping to abandon was not actually his child. The paternity results invalidated every assumption he had made about his obligations and relationships, while simultaneously stripping him of any legal standing to claim custody or visitation rights. Ryan's attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who had been scrambling to understand the case since receiving the emergency summons, attempted to challenge the admissibility of various pieces of evidence, but was consistently overruled by Judge Barnes. The scope and quality of our documentation left little room for legal maneuvering, and Ryan's obvious guilt made it impossible to mount an effective defense against charges that were supported by overwhelming evidence. "Mr. Miller," Judge Barnes said, addressing Ryan directly after reviewing all the evidence presented, "the court finds sufficient proof of adultery, financial fraud, and misrepresentation to invoke Article 16 of your prenuptial agreement. You are hereby stripped of all claims to marital assets, including the family home, joint savings accounts, and any property acquired during the marriage. Furthermore, the paternity test results indicate that you have no biological relationship to Emma Miller, which terminates any potential custody or visitation rights you might have claimed." The judge's ruling was comprehensive and final, addressing not only the immediate dissolution of our marriage, but the long-term implications for Ryan's financial and legal standing. Margaret had structured our case to ensure that Ryan would face consequences that extended far beyond the divorce proceedings, creating a foundation for criminal prosecution and civil litigation that would follow him for years to come. But Judge Barnes wasn't finished with his assessment of Ryan's character and crimes. "Mr. Miller, the evidence presented today suggests that you have engaged in systematic fraud, embezzlement, and identity deception spanning multiple years. The court is referring this matter to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation, and I am issuing a restraining order preventing you from contacting Jessica or Emma Miller while these matters are resolved." The restraining order meant that Ryan would be legally barred from our home, our neighborhood, and Emma's school, effectively cutting him off from any connection to the life we had built together. The man who had spent years taking our family for granted while planning his escape was now being forcibly removed from our lives by court order, facing the reality that his betrayal had cost him everything he had tried so hard to preserve. Ryan's attempt to address the court was pathetic and desperate, revealing a man who still believed that his charm and manipulation could somehow reverse the consequences of his actions. Your Honor, I know I made mistakes, but Jessica and I can work this out privately. Emma has been my daughter for 4 years, and she needs stability, not this kind of disruption. I'm willing to pay child support and maintain a relationship with my family. Judge Barnes cut him off with the kind of judicial authority that brooks no argument. Mr. Miller, Emma is not your daughter, you have no family relationship with these women, and your criminal behavior has forfeited any right you might have had to negotiate terms. This court is concerned with justice and the protection of victims, not with preserving relationships built on fraud and deception. The finality of the judge's words seemed to break something fundamental in Ryan's psyche, and I watched him collapse into his chair with the expression of someone who had finally understood that his carefully planned future had been completely destroyed. The confident manipulator who had abandoned me at restaurants while secretly meeting his mistress was gone, replaced by a broken man who had lost his family, his business, his inheritance, and potentially his freedom. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Margaret explained the next steps in a process that would likely extend for months, as various agencies investigated Ryan's crimes and pursued appropriate penalties. The criminal charges will probably result in 3 to 5 years in state prison, she said as we walked toward her car in the courthouse parking lot. The civil litigation from the Thompson family will likely bankrupt him permanently, and the professional consequences will ensure that he never works in real estate or any related field again. Ryan Miller's life as he knew it is over. The transformation in my own circumstances was equally dramatic but infinitely more positive. Article 16 had awarded me complete ownership of our home, all marital assets, and the contents of Ryan's investment accounts that hadn't been frozen by criminal investigators. More importantly, Emma's true parentage had connected her to Michael Stevens, a man who had immediately expressed interest in developing a relationship with the daughter he had never known existed. Michael's response to learning about Emma had been everything I could have hoped for from a potential father figure. He had requested a meeting within days of receiving the paternity results, arriving at my house with flowers, children's books, and a nervous excitement that reminded me of why I had been drawn to him years earlier. His first interaction with Emma was awkward but genuine, with both of them clearly trying to understand their new relationship while building a foundation for future connection. I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace anyone or disrupt Emma's life, Michael had said during our initial conversation about his role in our daughter's future. But I also want her to know that she has a father who loves her and wants to be part of her life if that's what she wants to. I know this is complicated, but I'm committed to making it work in whatever way is best for Emma. Emma's adjustment to the truth about her parentage had been easier than I had anticipated, largely because she was young enough to accept change without the emotional baggage that adults carry into difficult situations. Her initial confusion about why Daddy Ryan couldn't live with us anymore had been heartbreaking, but she had quickly adapted to the new reality of having Michael as her biological father, while maintaining fond memories of the man who had raised her for 4 years. The most surprising aspect of Emma's transition had been her immediate acceptance of Michael as a father figure, perhaps because his gentle nature and genuine interest in her well-being contrasted so sharply with Ryan's increasing absence and distraction during the final months of our marriage. Within weeks of their first meeting, Emma was calling Michael Dad and looking forward to their weekend outings with the enthusiasm that had once been reserved for special occasions with Ryan. The financial security that resulted from invoking Article 16 allowed me to make changes in my life that had been impossible during my marriage to Ryan. I was able to reduce my teaching load to part-time, giving me more flexibility to spend time with Emma and pursue interests that had been neglected during years of struggling to make our household budget work. The house that had once felt like a showcase for Ryan's success became a comfortable home, where Emma and I could build new traditions and memories, without the undercurrent of deception that had characterized our previous family life. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Ryan's downfall was watching him face the social consequences of his crimes within the tight-knit Scottsdale community, where reputation meant everything. The Thompson family's public disavowal of Ryan, combined with criminal charges and the details of his affair, had made him a pariah among the social and business circles where he had once been welcomed and respected. The man who had been so concerned with status and image was now the subject of gossip and speculation, serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying trust and family obligations. Ryan's attempts to rebuild his life after the divorce had been consistently unsuccessful, hampered by criminal charges, civil litigation, and a reputation that made him unemployable in any respectable field. His relationship with Sophia had ended within weeks of his arrest, when she realized that the wealthy businessman she had been dating was actually a bankrupt criminal facing years in prison. The pregnancy that had once represented their future together became another reminder of poor judgment and failed planning, as Sophia chose to raise their child as a single mother rather than associate with Ryan's scandal. The final legal proceedings in Ryan's criminal case concluded 18 months after our divorce, with him accepting a plea agreement that resulted in 4 years in state prison for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for me to deliver a victim impact statement that addressed not only the financial damage Ryan had caused, but the emotional trauma of discovering that my entire marriage had been built on lies and manipulation. Ryan Miller didn't just steal money from his family's business, I told the court during his sentencing. He stole years of my life by convincing me to love and trust someone who never existed. He stole Emma's sense of security by pretending to be her father while secretly hoping she wasn't his child. And he stole the respect and trust of everyone who believed in him, proving that some betrayals are so fundamental that they can never be forgiven or forgotten. The judge's response to my statement was both compassionate and decisive, acknowledging the scope of Ryan's crimes while ensuring that his punishment reflected the damage he had caused to multiple victims. Mr. Miller, your actions demonstrate a pattern of selfishness and deception that has caused immeasurable harm to people who trusted and loved you. This court sentences you to 4 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and full restitution to all victims of your crimes. As Ryan was led away in handcuffs to begin his prison sentence, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, relief, and closure that marked the end of a chapter that had begun with his betrayal and concluded with complete justice. The man who had abandoned me emotionally and financially while planning his escape with another woman was now facing years of incarceration and a lifetime of consequences that would serve as permanent reminders of the price of betrayal. Emma and I attended a celebration dinner that evening with Michael and Margaret, marking not just the conclusion of Ryan's legal troubles, but the beginning of a new phase of our lives, built on honesty, security, and genuine relationships. Emma was excited about starting kindergarten in the fall, with Michael planning to attend her school events and participate in her activities as an involved father. The stability and love that had been missing during the final years of my marriage to Ryan had been replaced by authentic relationships that promised a brighter future for both of us. Looking back on the journey from discovery to justice, I realized that Ryan's insistence on Article 16 had been the instrument of his own destruction, a legal mechanism designed to protect his wealth that ultimately stripped him of everything he valued. His arrogance and assumption that I was too naive to challenge his deception had blinded him to the possibility that the very document he had used to trap me would become the weapon that destroyed him completely. The prenuptial agreement that had once made me feel insecure and unworthy had become the foundation for my empowerment and independence, proving that sometimes the things we fear most can become our greatest sources of strength. Article 16 had given me the legal authority to reclaim my life and ensure that Emma grew up knowing the truth about her parentage and her worth, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and respected her. 3 years after Ryan's conviction, Emma and I were thriving in ways that would have been impossible during our marriage to a man who saw us as expendable. Emma was excelling in school, participating in activities that Ryan had always been too busy to attend, and building a strong relationship with Michael that was based on genuine affection rather than obligation or pretense. My own life had expanded beyond the narrow confines of trying to please someone who was incapable of real love, allowing me to pursue interests, friendships, and goals that had been suppressed during years of emotional manipulation. The house that had once been a symbol of Ryan's success and my inadequacy had become a true home, where Emma and I could be ourselves without fear of judgment or criticism. The financial security that resulted from Article 16 had given us options and opportunities that extended far beyond material comfort, providing the foundation for a life built on truth, respect, and authentic relationships. Ryan's story had become a cautionary tale within the Scottsdale community, a reminder that some betrayals carry consequences that extend far beyond the immediate victims to encompass entire families and social networks. His name was mentioned in whispered conversations about the importance of character and integrity, serving as an example of how quickly a carefully constructed reputation could be destroyed by selfishness and deception. But for Emma and me, Ryan's downfall had represented liberation rather than destruction, freeing us from a relationship that had been poisoning our lives while we tried desperately to make it work. The truth about our family's foundation had been painful to discover, but it had also provided the opportunity to build something better, stronger, and more authentic than anything we had experienced during our marriage to a man who was fundamentally incapable of real love or commitment. The prenuptial agreement that had once symbolized my powerlessness had become the instrument of my empowerment, proving that sometimes the very mechanisms designed to control us can become our greatest sources of freedom. Article 16 had given me not just financial security, but the legal authority to demand truth, justice, and accountability from someone who had spent years treating me as disposable. Emma's relationship with Michael continued to grow stronger with each passing month, providing her with the kind of stable, loving father figure that every child deserves. Their bond was built on honesty, respect, and genuine affection, rather than the performative family dynamics that had characterized our life with Ryan. Watching them together, I realized that Emma was experiencing real fatherhood for the first time, learning what it meant to be unconditionally loved and valued by a parent who put her well-being ahead of his own interests. As I tucked Emma into bed on the third anniversary of Ryan's conviction, she looked up at me with the kind of peaceful contentment that had been absent during the chaotic final years of our marriage. "Mom," she said, her voice sleepy but thoughtful, "I'm glad things worked out the way they did. Dad Michael is the best daddy ever, and our house feels happy now." Her simple words captured everything about our transformation, from victims to survivors to people who were genuinely thriving. The journey from betrayal to justice had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had ultimately led us to a life that was more authentic, secure, and fulfilling than anything we could have achieved, while trapped in a relationship built on lies and manipulation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Scottsdale courthouse steps as I emerged from what would be the final hearing in the legal saga that had consumed 2 years of my life. The appeals court had unanimously upheld every aspect of Judge Barnes' original ruling, confirming that Article 16 of our prenuptial agreement had been properly invoked, and that Ryan's complete loss of marital assets and parental rights was legally sound and permanent. Margaret walked beside me, carrying a briefcase filled with documents that represented the total destruction of Ryan's attempts to overturn his conviction and reclaim any portion of the life he had forfeited through his crimes. The appeals process had been Ryan's last desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his actions, funded by a legal aid organization that specialized in helping convicted felons challenge their sentences. His attorneys had argued that the prenuptial agreement was unconscionable, that the paternity testing had been conducted without proper consent, and that the financial fraud charges had been inflated to prejudice the family court proceedings. Each argument had been systematically dismantled by Margaret's meticulous documentation and the overwhelming evidence of Ryan's systematic deception, spanning nearly our entire marriage. But the appeals court had gone further than simply upholding the original ruling, taking the unusual step of criticizing Ryan's legal team for filing frivolous motions that wasted judicial resources while causing additional trauma to the victims of his crimes. Judge Patricia Hernandez, who had presided over the appeals hearing, had been particularly scathing in her assessment of Ryan's character and his continued attempts to avoid responsibility for his actions. Mr. Miller's appeals demonstrate the same pattern of manipulation and self-serving behavior that characterized his criminal conduct, Judge Hernandez had written in her opinion. Rather than accepting responsibility for his crimes and focusing on rehabilitation, he has chosen to continue victimizing his former family through baseless legal challenges that have no merit in law or equity. This court finds his conduct during the appeals process to be consistent with the narcissistic personality traits that enabled his original crimes. The judicial criticism had effectively ended any possibility that Ryan could continue his legal challenges, while also creating a permanent record of his character that would follow him for the rest of his life. The appeals court opinion would be part of public records accessible to future employers, parole officers, and anyone else who might need to assess Ryan's trustworthiness or rehabilitation. His attempt to escape consequences had instead resulted in additional documentation of his fundamental inability to accept responsibility or demonstrate genuine remorse. Walking to my car after the hearing, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since the morning I discovered Ryan's affair in his email correspondence. The frightened, confused woman who had sat in her kitchen reading evidence of her husband's betrayal had been replaced by someone who understood her own strength and refused to accept less than she deserved. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through a series of decisions to fight for truth and justice rather than accepting comfortable lies. Emma was now 7 years old and thriving in ways that would have been impossible during our life with Ryan. Her relationship with Michael had evolved into the kind of father-daughter bond that every child deserves, built on unconditional love, consistent presence, and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. Michael attended every school event, helped with homework assignments, and created traditions that were uniquely theirs, from Saturday morning pancake breakfasts to weekend hiking adventures in the desert mountains surrounding Phoenix. The contrast between Michael's parenting style and Ryan's performative fatherhood had become more apparent as Emma matured and began to articulate her feelings about both relationships. "Dad, Michael listens to me," she had explained to her school counselor during a routine check-in about her family situation. "He cares about what I think and how I feel. Daddy Ryan used to act like he was listening, but he was always thinking about other things." Emma's insight into the difference between authentic and performative relationships had been remarkable for someone so young, but it also reflected the emotional intelligence that had developed as a result of living through our family's transformation. She had learned to recognize genuine care and attention, skills that would serve her well throughout her life as she built relationships with people who truly valued her. The financial security that resulted from Article 16 had allowed me to make choices based on what was best for Emma and myself rather than what was merely affordable. I had been able to purchase a smaller but more comfortable home in a neighborhood with excellent schools, ensuring that Emma's education would provide her with opportunities that extended far beyond what my teacher's salary alone could have supported. The house was modest compared to the showcase property Ryan had insisted on during our marriage, but it was truly ours, filled with memories and possessions that reflected our authentic interests rather than someone else's need to project success. My career had also evolved in directions that would have been impossible during my marriage to Ryan. The part-time teaching position had allowed me to pursue a master's degree in counseling, specializing in helping children and families navigate divorce and custody transitions. The personal experience of rebuilding our family after betrayal had given me insights and empathy that enhanced my professional effectiveness, creating a career that felt meaningful rather than merely necessary. The counseling practice I had established was located in a suite of offices near Emma's school, allowing me to maintain a schedule that prioritized her needs while building a client base of families facing challenges similar to what we had experienced. Many of my clients were women who had discovered that their marriages were built on deception, and I was able to offer both professional expertise and personal understanding of the journey, from victim to survivor to someone who was genuinely thriving. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying, particularly when I could help other mothers recognize their own strength and refuse to accept relationships that diminished their worth. Each successful case felt like a small victory against the kind of manipulation and abuse that had characterized my marriage to Ryan. Proof that recovery and empowerment were possible, even after the most devastating betrayals. Margaret had become not just my attorney, but a genuine friend and mentor, someone who had taught me to recognize my own power and use it effectively. Our professional relationship had evolved into a personal connection based on mutual respect and shared values about justice and accountability. She had been instrumental in helping me navigate not just the legal aspects of my divorce, but the emotional and practical challenges of rebuilding a life after discovering that everything I had believed about my marriage was false. "You've become one of my most successful transformation stories," Margaret had told me during our celebration dinner after the appeals court ruling. When you first came to my office, you were broken and scared, convinced that you deserved the treatment Ryan was giving you. Now you're a confident, successful woman who serves as an example to other victims that recovery and empowerment are possible. Margaret's observation had helped me recognize how far I had traveled from the woman who had been afraid to challenge Ryan's explanations for his suspicious behavior. The fear of confrontation and abandonment that had kept me trapped in an abusive relationship had been replaced by confidence in my own judgment and willingness to demand honesty and respect from everyone in my life. The Scottsdale community's response to Ryan's crimes had been swift and decisive, with former friends and business associates distancing themselves from his scandal while rallying around Emma and me with support and encouragement. The same social circles that had once made me feel inadequate and out of place had embraced us as victims who deserved compassion and assistance, providing everything from playdates for Emma to professional networking opportunities for my counseling practice. The Thompson family's reaction to Ryan's conviction had been particularly gratifying, not because I wished them pain, but because their response demonstrated that people of genuine character would choose justice over family loyalty when confronted with clear evidence of wrongdoing. Robert and Linda Thompson had not only cooperated fully with criminal prosecutors, but had established a scholarship fund in Emma's name at her elementary school, acknowledging that she had been an innocent victim of Ryan's crimes who deserved support and opportunities. "We want Emma to know that she has family who love her, even though the man we thought was our son proved to be someone we never really knew," Linda Thompson had written in a letter accompanying the scholarship announcement. Ryan's crimes don't reflect on Emma's character or worth, and we hope this scholarship will help her pursue her dreams and achieve everything she's capable of accomplishing. The Thompson family's gesture had been deeply moving, representing a level of moral courage that stood in sharp contrast to Ryan's inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Their willingness to acknowledge Emma's worth despite having no biological connection to her had demonstrated the kind of character that Ryan had always lacked, even while he was benefiting from their generosity and trust. Ryan's current circumstances reflected the complete collapse of everything he had worked to achieve during his adult life. He was serving his sentence at a medium-security prison outside Tucson, working in the facility's library while pursuing a correspondence degree in business ethics, an irony that wasn't lost on anyone familiar with his case. His requests for early parole had been consistently denied, largely because of his continued attempts to minimize his crimes and blame others for his circumstances. The prison counselor's reports that were part of his parole applications painted a picture of someone who had learned to say the right words about remorse and rehabilitation, but who lacked genuine insight into the impact of his crimes on his victims. Inmate Miller demonstrates superficial compliance with treatment programs but continues to exhibit narcissistic thinking patterns that suggest limited capacity for genuine empathy or behavioral change, one evaluation had noted. Sophia Martinez had disappeared from Arizona entirely after Ryan's conviction, relocating to California with their son and establishing a new identity that avoided any connection to the scandal that had destroyed Ryan's reputation. According to mutual acquaintances, she had changed her name and was working as a photographer in Los Angeles, having learned from her experience with Ryan that relationships built on deception and financial fraud were ultimately unsustainable. The child that Sophia and Ryan had conceived during their affair would grow up knowing nothing about his father's crimes or the family that had been destroyed to finance his mother's relationship with a married man. In many ways, this was probably the best possible outcome for an innocent child who bore no responsibility for the adult's poor choices and destructive behavior. Emma's questions about Ryan had evolved as she matured and began to understand the adult complexities that had shaped her early childhood. Her therapist had helped her process the confusing emotions that came with learning that the man she had called father for the first 4 years of her life was not actually related to her, and had been planning to abandon her before his crimes were discovered. "I understand now that Ryan was sick in his mind," Emma had told me during one of our conversations about her feelings toward her former father figure. "He couldn't love people the right way because something was broken inside him. I feel sad for him, but I'm not angry anymore because I have Dad Michael now, and he loves me the way fathers are supposed to love their daughters." Emma's emotional maturity and capacity for forgiveness had been remarkable, but she had also learned to recognize the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships in ways that would protect her throughout her life. The trauma of our family's dissolution had been transformed into wisdom and resilience that would serve her well as she navigated future relationships and challenges. The educational opportunities that the Thompson Scholarship provided had allowed Emma to attend a private school that specialized in gifted and talented students, where she was excelling academically while developing interests in science and mathematics that pointed toward a bright future. Her teachers consistently praised her kindness, intelligence, and leadership qualities, characteristics that had emerged more fully once she was freed from the chaos and uncertainty that had characterized our final years with Ryan. Michael's consistency and emotional availability had been crucial to Emma's development, providing the stable father figure she needed while respecting the complexity of her feelings about her relationship with Ryan. He had never tried to replace her memories of Ryan or pretend that their early relationship hadn't been meaningful to her, instead focusing on building something new and authentic that honored Emma's emotional needs. "I want Emma to understand that she deserves to be loved unconditionally," Michael had explained during one of our discussions about co-parenting strategies. "Whatever mistakes Ryan made, they don't reflect on Emma's worth or her right to have a father who puts her needs first. My job is to show her what healthy love looks like, so she'll recognize it in all her future relationships." The stability that Michael provided had allowed Emma to flourish emotionally and academically, developing confidence and self-esteem that had been undermined during the chaotic final period of our marriage to Ryan. She was participating in extracurricular activities, building friendships with classmates, and exploring interests that reflected her authentic personality rather than trying to please adults who were distracted by their own problems. My own romantic life had remained focused on Emma and my career during the immediate aftermath of the divorce, but I had gradually begun to open myself to the possibility of new relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. The experience of marriage to someone who was fundamentally dishonest had taught me to recognize red flags and trust my instincts about people's character, skills that made me a more discerning partner than I had been in my youth. The few relationships I had pursued had been with men who demonstrated consistency between their words and actions, who treated Emma with genuine kindness, and who understood that any serious relationship with me would need to include respect for my daughter and my commitment to her well-being. The contrast between these authentic connections and the performative romance that had characterized my relationship with Ryan was profound, helping me understand what genuine partnership could feel like. But more importantly, I had learned to find fulfillment and purpose in my own life, rather than seeking validation through romantic relationships. The independence and self-confidence that had developed through surviving Ryan's betrayal and rebuilding our family had taught me that I was complete as an individual, capable of creating meaning and happiness without depending on someone else's approval or presence. The legal profession had taken notice of our case as an example of how prenuptial agreements could be used to protect victims, rather than simply shield wealthy spouses from financial consequences. Margaret had been invited to speak at conferences about the strategic use of existing legal documents to ensure justice for abuse victims, using our experience as a case study in creative legal advocacy. The Miller case demonstrates that sometimes the very documents designed to limit someone's power can become instruments of empowerment when properly understood and strategically applied, Margaret had explained during her presentation to the Arizona State Bar Association. Article 16 was intended to protect Ryan's family wealth from potential gold diggers, but it became the mechanism that ensured complete justice for the victims of his crimes. The professional recognition that our case had generated had enhanced Margaret's reputation while providing a platform for educating other attorneys about innovative approaches to family law that prioritized victim protection and accountability. The legal strategies that had proven successful in my case were now being adapted and applied in similar situations across the country, helping other women escape abusive relationships while ensuring their abusers faced appropriate consequences. The community service work that had grown out of my counseling practice had connected me with organizations throughout Arizona that supported families affected by domestic abuse and financial fraud. I served on the board of directors for a nonprofit that provided legal assistance to women seeking to escape abusive marriages, bringing both professional expertise and personal experience to help shape policies and programs that address the complex needs of abuse survivors. The speaking engagements that resulted from this advocacy work had given me opportunities to share our story with audiences of professionals, students, and community members who could benefit from understanding the dynamics of financial abuse and the importance of legal protections for vulnerable family members. Each presentation felt like a small victory against the silence and shame that enabled abusers to continue their destructive behavior without consequences. Emma often accompanied me to these speaking events, serving as a living example of resilience and recovery that inspired audiences while demonstrating that children could not only survive family trauma, but emerge stronger and more compassionate as a result. Her presence reminded everyone that the stakes in these cases extended beyond individual justice, to include the well-being of innocent children who deserved protection and support. The financial independence that resulted from Article 16 had allowed me to make charitable contributions to organizations that had supported us during our most difficult period, creating a cycle of assistance that helped other families facing similar challenges. The Sunny Days Elementary School Counseling Program had received funding for additional resources. The women's shelter where I volunteered had upgraded their legal advocacy services, and the Children's Therapy Center that had helped Emma process her trauma had expanded their programs for families affected by divorce and custody disputes. These contributions felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with our victimization and evolved into empowerment and service to others facing similar challenges. The money that Ryan had tried to steal and hide had instead become a force for positive change that would benefit families throughout our community for years to come. The long-term impact of our legal victory extended beyond our personal situation to influence how family courts throughout Arizona approached cases involving financial fraud and child welfare. The precedent established by Judge Barnes' ruling had been cited in subsequent cases where prenuptial agreements contained similar protective clauses, ensuring that other victims could access the same legal protections that had been crucial to our recovery. Legal scholars had written articles analyzing the strategic implications of our case, noting how the combination of criminal prosecution and civil litigation had created consequences that were far more comprehensive than either approach alone could have achieved. The interdisciplinary approach that Margaret had pioneered was now being taught in law schools as an example of effective victim advocacy that addressed both immediate safety needs and long-term justice concerns. Ryan's parole hearing, scheduled for the following year, would provide one final opportunity to assess whether he had developed genuine insight into his crimes and their impact on his victims. The parole board would review not only his prison record, but also the continued effects of his actions on Emma and me, ensuring that any decision about early release would prioritize victim safety and community protection over Ryan's convenience. The victim impact statement I would present at his parole hearing was already drafted, focusing not on revenge, but on the ongoing consequences of his crimes, and the importance of ensuring that he demonstrated genuine rehabilitation before being released back into the community. The statement emphasized that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that true accountability meant accepting consequences while working to ensure that similar harm never occurred again. Ryan Miller's crimes weren't momentary lapses in judgment, but systematic abuse that extended over years and affected multiple victims, the statement read. Any decision about his early release should consider whether he has developed the insight and empathy necessary to prevent future victimization, not just whether he has served the minimum required time. The parole process would also provide an opportunity to assess whether Ryan had used his incarceration constructively, pursuing education and therapy that addressed the underlying personality traits that had enabled his criminal behavior. The prison report suggested that his compliance with programs was motivated more by desire for early release than genuine commitment to personal growth, a pattern that raised concerns about his likelihood of reoffending if released prematurely. As Emma and I drove home from the courthouse after the final appeals hearing, I reflected on the journey that had begun with discovery of Ryan's betrayal and culminated in complete legal victory and personal transformation. The woman who had once been afraid to challenge her husband's suspicious explanations had become someone who demanded truth and accountability while building a life based on authentic relationships and meaningful work. Emma was chatting excitedly about her upcoming science fair project, a study of desert plant adaptation that reflected her growing interest in environmental science and her connection to the Arizona landscape that had become our true home. Her enthusiasm for learning and discovery reminded me that resilience wasn't just about surviving trauma, but about maintaining curiosity and hope for the future despite difficult experiences. The house we pulled into was truly ours, decorated with photographs and mementos that reflected our authentic interests and relationships, rather than someone else's need to project success. The garden that Emma and I had planted together was flourishing in the desert climate, producing vegetables and flowers that provided both practical benefits and symbolic representation of growth after destruction. The evening routine that followed was peaceful and predictable, centered around homework, dinner preparation, and conversation about Emma's day at school and my work with clients. The chaos and tension that had characterized our final months with Ryan had been replaced by stability and mutual respect that allowed both of us to pursue our interests while supporting each other's goals and dreams. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, she looked up at me with the kind of contentment that had been absent during our years with Ryan. "Mom, I'm glad things worked out the way they did," she said, echoing sentiments she had expressed before but with additional maturity and understanding. "Our life is real now, not pretend like it was before." Her simple observation captured the essence of our transformation, from a family built on deception to one founded on truth and mutual love. The prenuptial agreement that had once symbolized my powerlessness had become the instrument of our liberation, proving that sometimes the very mechanisms designed to control us can become our greatest sources of freedom and empowerment. The legal victory that had begun with Article 16 had evolved into something far more significant than financial settlement or custody arrangements. It had become a foundation for building authentic relationships, pursuing meaningful work, and demonstrating that justice was possible even when the odds seemed overwhelming and the opposition appeared insurmountable. The story of our family's destruction and rebuilding had become a testament to the power of truth, the importance of legal protections for vulnerable people, and the possibility of transformation even after the most devastating betrayals. Ryan's attempt to use a prenuptial agreement to trap and control me had instead provided the tools for my complete empowerment and his total accountability. 5 years had passed since the courthouse steps victory that sealed Ryan's fate forever, and the autumn air in Scottsdale carried the crisp promise of new seasons and fresh possibilities. Emma was now 12 years old, standing on the threshold between childhood and adolescence, with a confidence and wisdom that reflected the stability and love that had defined her life since Michael became her true father. The awkward 7-year-old who had once struggled to understand why her world had changed so dramatically had blossomed into a remarkable young woman whose intelligence, kindness, and resilience impressed everyone who met her. The middle school science fair, where Emma was presenting her award-winning project on sustainable water conservation in desert climates, represented everything about the life we had built together after escaping Ryan's web of deception. Her research was sophisticated and thorough, reflecting not just academic ability, but genuine passion for environmental science that had developed through countless weekend hiking trips with Michael in the Sonoran Desert surrounding Phoenix. The project had already qualified for state competition, and several universities had expressed interest in her work, despite her young age. Michael stood beside me in the crowded gymnasium, his face glowing with paternal pride, as Emma explained her methodology to a panel of judges who were clearly impressed by her knowledge and presentation skills. The transformation in both Emma and Michael over the past 5 years had been remarkable to witness, as their father-daughter relationship had deepened from tentative beginning to unshakable bond, built on mutual respect, shared interests, and unconditional love. "She's going to change the world someday," Michael whispered to me as we watched Emma field complex questions from scientists and engineers who were serving as competition judges. "Not because she's brilliant, though she certainly is, but because she understands that knowledge is only valuable when it's used to help others. That's a lesson she learned from watching you rebuild our family after everything Ryan put you through." The counseling practice that had grown from my determination to help other families navigate similar betrayals had evolved into a comprehensive family therapy center that served clients throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. The success of the practice had allowed me to hire additional therapists and social workers, creating a team approach that addressed the complex needs of families dealing with divorce, abuse, and custody disputes. My specialization in cases involving financial fraud and parental deception had made me a recognized expert in the field, with referrals coming from attorneys, judges, and other mental health professionals who understood the unique challenges these families faced. The most rewarding aspect of the work wasn't the professional recognition or financial success, but the opportunity to guide other mothers through the same journey, from victimization to empowerment, that had transformed my own life. Each woman who discovered her own strength and refused to accept less than she deserved felt like a personal victory against the manipulation and abuse that had once defined my own marriage. The therapy sessions where clients realized they had the power to change their circumstances reminded me constantly of how far I had traveled from the frightened woman who had once been afraid to challenge Ryan's obvious lies. Margaret had recently been appointed to the Arizona State Supreme Court, a recognition of her brilliance and dedication to justice that surprised no one who had worked with her. During her confirmation hearings, she had specifically mentioned our case as an example of how creative legal advocacy could protect vulnerable family members while ensuring that abusers faced appropriate consequences. The precedent established by our successful invocation of Article 16 had been cited in dozens of subsequent cases, helping other victims escape abusive relationships while securing the financial resources they needed to rebuild their lives. The Miller case taught me that sometimes the most effective legal strategies involve using existing documents in ways their authors never intended, Margaret had testified during her confirmation hearing. Ryan Miller designed Article 16 to protect his family's wealth from potential gold diggers, but it became the mechanism that ensured complete justice for the victims of his crimes. That experience reinforced my belief that creative advocacy combined with thorough preparation can overcome even the most challenging legal obstacles. The Thompson family had maintained their relationship with Emma and me throughout the years following Ryan's conviction, treating us as extended family members rather than reminders of their adoptive son's crimes. Robert Thompson had become a grandfather figure to Emma, teaching her about business principles and environmental responsibility through the lens of sustainable real estate development. Linda Thompson had been equally supportive, including Emma in family gatherings and ensuring that she understood her worth wasn't diminished by Ryan's actions or his lack of biological connection to the family. The scholarship fund they had established in Emma's name had grown to support multiple students each year, providing educational opportunities for children from families affected by domestic abuse or financial fraud. The annual scholarship ceremony had become a community event that raised awareness about these issues, while celebrating the resilience of children who had overcome difficult circumstances. Emma served as a youth ambassador for the program, sharing her story with other young people who were navigating family transitions and demonstrating that survival and success were possible even after devastating betrayals. Ryan's most recent parole hearing had ended in another denial, with the parole board citing his continued failure to demonstrate genuine remorse or insight into the impact of his crimes on his victims. The psychiatric evaluation conducted as part of the parole review had concluded that he continued to exhibit narcissistic personality traits that made him a poor candidate for early release. His participation in prison programs remained superficial and self-serving, motivated by desire for parole rather than authentic commitment to personal growth or victim restitution. Inmate Miller continues to minimize his crimes and blame external factors for his choices, the parole board's written decision had stated. His statements during the hearing demonstrated limited empathy for his victims and persistent focus on his own hardships rather than the consequences of his actions for others. The board finds insufficient evidence of rehabilitation to justify early release at this time. The victim impact statement I had presented at the hearing had emphasized not revenge, but accountability, focusing on the ongoing effects of Ryan's crimes on Emma's development and my own recovery process. The statement had been carefully crafted to demonstrate that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that true justice meant ensuring Ryan understood the full scope of his impact on others before being released back into the community. Emma's relationship with the concept of forgiveness had evolved as she matured and gained perspective on the adult complexities that had shaped her early childhood. Her therapist had helped her understand that forgiving Ryan didn't mean excusing his behavior or pretending that his crimes hadn't caused real harm to our family. Instead, forgiveness had become a tool for her own emotional health, allowing her to release anger and resentment that might otherwise have limited her capacity for joy and connection. I don't hate Ryan anymore, Emma had explained during one of our conversations about her feelings toward her former father figure. I understand that he was sick in ways that made him hurt people, and I feel sorry for him because he missed out on knowing the real me. But I'm also grateful that his crimes were discovered when they were, because otherwise I might never have found Dad Michael or learned what real fatherhood looks like. The wisdom and emotional maturity that Emma displayed in discussing these complex issues never failed to amaze me, reflecting not just her natural intelligence but the security and support that had characterized her life since Michael became her father. The chaotic uncertainty that had defined our final months with Ryan had been replaced by predictability and trust that allowed Emma to focus on growth and exploration rather than survival and adaptation. Michael's parenting philosophy had been crucial to Emma's emotional development, emphasizing honesty, consistency, and respect for her autonomy, while providing the structure and guidance she needed to navigate adolescence successfully. His approach contrasted sharply with Ryan's performative fatherhood, which had been designed more to maintain his image as a successful family man than to address Emma's actual emotional needs. Every child deserves to feel unconditionally loved and valued, Michael had explained to the family court during one of our early custody hearings. My job as Emma's father isn't to mold her into someone who meets my expectations, but to provide the support and guidance she needs to become the person she's meant to be. That means listening to her thoughts and feelings, respecting her opinions, and demonstrating through my actions that she can always count on me. The romantic relationship that had developed between Michael and me over the years had grown naturally from our shared commitment to Emma's well-being and our mutual respect for each other's character and values. Unlike the intense passion and manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Ryan, our connection was built on friendship, compatibility, and genuine appreciation for each other's strengths and perspectives. The engagement ring that Michael had presented to me on Emma's 12th birthday represented not just our commitment to each other, but our dedication to the family we had built together through honesty, patience, and mutual support. Emma had been included in the proposal planning, helping Michael choose the ring and the location for the surprise that had taken place during one of our weekend hiking trips in the mountains north of Phoenix. "I want to marry both of you," Michael had said as he knelt beside the desert spring where we had stopped for lunch during our hike. "Emma, you've taught me what it means to be a father, and Jessica, you've shown me what authentic love looks like. I can't imagine my life without either of you, and I want to make our family official in every way possible." The wedding planning that followed had been a collaborative effort that reflected our commitment to building traditions and memories that honored all of our perspectives and preferences. Emma had chosen her own dress and helped design the ceremony that would take place in the desert botanical garden, where we had spent so many peaceful afternoons exploring and learning together. The guest list included Margaret, the Thompson family, colleagues from my therapy practice, and friends from Emma's school who had become extended family members over the years. The contrast between planning this wedding and the elaborate production that had characterized my marriage to Ryan was profound and meaningful. Instead of trying to impress guests or project an image of success, our celebration would focus on genuine relationships and authentic joy. The simplicity and sincerity of our approach reflected the values that had guided our family's recovery and growth since escaping Ryan's destructive influence. The financial security that had resulted from Article 16 had provided the foundation for choices based on what was best for our family rather than what was merely affordable or convenient. The college fund that had been established for Emma would ensure that she could pursue higher education without the financial stress that had once limited my own opportunities. The house we were purchasing together represented stability and permanence that none of us had experienced during the chaotic years when Ryan's crimes were destabilizing our entire foundation. The community recognition that our story had generated had led to speaking opportunities at conferences and universities where I could share insights about resilience, legal advocacy, and family recovery with audiences of professionals and students. These presentations always emphasized that survival wasn't enough, that true healing required building something better and more authentic than what had been destroyed by betrayal and abuse. Emma often accompanied me to these speaking engagements, serving as living proof that children could not only survive family trauma, but emerge stronger and more compassionate as a result. Her presence reminded audiences that the stakes in these cases extended beyond individual justice, to include the well-being of innocent children who deserved protection and support from both legal systems and communities. The charitable foundation that we had established using funds recovered through Article 16 continued to support families throughout Arizona who were navigating similar challenges to what we had faced. The foundation provided emergency financial assistance, legal advocacy, and counseling services to women and children escaping abusive relationships, ensuring that lack of resources didn't prevent them from seeking safety and justice. The annual fundraising gala for the foundation had become one of Scottsdale's premier charity events, attracting support from business leaders, politicians, and community members who understood the importance of protecting vulnerable families. Emma served as a youth spokesperson for the foundation, sharing her story with donors and volunteers who were inspired by her resilience and determination to help others facing similar challenges. As we stood together in the school gymnasium watching Emma answer questions from science fair judges, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment of triumph and possibility. The frightened woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal in his email correspondence had been transformed into someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than authentic love and respect. The prenuptial agreement that had once symbolized my powerlessness had become the instrument of our complete liberation, proving that sometimes the very mechanisms designed to control us can become our greatest sources of freedom and empowerment. Article 16 had given us not just financial security, but the legal authority to demand truth, justice, and accountability from someone who had treated us as disposable. Emma's success at the science fair, Michael's unwavering love and support, and the meaningful work that filled my days all represented victories over the manipulation and abuse that had once defined our lives. The future that stretched ahead of us was bright with possibility, built on the solid foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care that would sustain us through whatever challenges we might face. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.